Vanessa Kroll had built her marketing firm from a two-person startup into a glass tower agency with clients across 3 continents. And she'd done it by trusting appearances almost as much as numbers. Polished shoes meant competence, sharp suits meant ambition. She judged rooms in seconds and she rarely thought twice about doing it. That morning, walking through the lobby toward the elevators, she noticed the building's new janitor for the first time, an older man, maybe 60. Quietly wiping down the reception desk's glass surface with careful, unhurried strokes. His uniform was neat but worn thin at the elbows. And on his wrist, visible as he reached to clean a smudge near the corner, sat a scratched, faded watch, its leather band cracked with age. Its face scuffed enough that the numbers were barely legible. Vanessa slowed, more amused than curious. "That's quite the antique," she said to the small group of associates walking beside her, loud enough for the janitor to hear. "Someone should tell him time moved on decades ago." A couple of associates chuckled politely. The janitor didn't look up, didn't react, simply continued wiping the same section of glass with the same steady rhythm as before. "Table for one at the pawn shop," Vanessa added lightly, moving toward the elevator without waiting for a response, already forgetting the exchange as her attention shifted to the day's first meeting. The janitor, whose name badge read Frank watched her disappear into the elevator, then quietly returned to his cart, adjusting the sleeve of his uniform back over the watch without a word. He'd worked at Kroll Marketing for exactly 9 days. He kept to himself, arrived early, left late, and had said maybe 20 words total to anyone in the building beyond basic greetings. Most employees walked past him without a second glance, exactly the way he preferred it. He hadn't taken the job for conversation. He'd taken it because it was quiet, structured, and asked nothing of him beyond showing up and doing honest work, something he'd learned to value deeply after years of a very different kind of work entirely. What none of them knew was that the watch Vanessa had mocked in front of half, the office wasn't an antique bought at some flea market. It had been handed to him personally by a lieutenant colonel 22 years earlier, in a briefing room half a world away. The day after Frank Doyle had carried 3 wounded soldiers across 400 yards of open ground under sustained enemy fire, refusing to leave any of them behind even after taking a round through his own shoulder. The watch had belonged to the colonel's own father, a decorated veteran of an earlier war, and it was given to Frank not as decoration, but because the colonel had said in front of the entire unit that a man like that deserved to carry something that mattered. Frank had worn it every day since. It didn't need to look expensive. It needed to keep working the same way he intended to. 3 weeks passed uneventfully. Vanessa barely registered Frank's presence beyond the occasional passing glance. Until the afternoon, everything in the building changed within the span of 11 minutes. It started with a faint burning smell drifting from the server room on the 4th floor, quickly followed by a shrill, piercing fire alarm that sent nearly 200 employees scrambling from their desks in confused, disorganized panic. Smoke began curling from beneath the server room door, thick and acrid, spreading rapidly into the open-plan office beyond it. Vanessa emerged from her corner office to chaos, employees pushing toward the stairwells, some shouting, others frozen entirely. The kind of disorganized panic that turned a manageable situation dangerous within minutes. She scanned the room for anyone, capable of taking charge, and found instead exactly the person she least expected. Frank was already moving through the smoke-filled hallway with calm, deliberate purpose, directing employees firmly toward the stairwell exits. "This way, keep low, stay together," he called out, his voice carrying an authority Vanessa had never once heard from him. "Don't use the elevators." "Move," an assistant near the server room stumbled, coughing hard from the thickening smoke, disoriented and unable to find the exit through the haze. Frank crossed to her without hesitation, pulled his uniform jacket up over her mouth and nose, and guided her firmly toward the stairwell. Moving with the steady economy of someone who had done exactly this kind of thing before, under conditions far worse than an office fire. Vanessa, coughing against the smoke herself, watched him disappear back into the haze instead of following the crowd toward safety. "There's still someone in the server room," Frank called back to a security guard near the stairwell. "I heard something, get everyone else out." "I'll check, sir, you need to evacuate," the guard shouted after him. "Fire department's 2 minutes out." Frank didn't slow down. He pulled his shirt up over his mouth, dropped low beneath the thickening smoke layer, and pushed through the server room door. Inside, an IT technician named Priya Chandra lay collapsed near an overheating server rack, unconscious from smoke inhalation. A small electrical fire licking at cables just feet from where she'd fallen. Frank grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher, discharged it across the immediate flame source in 3 efficient bursts, then lifted Priya over his shoulder with the same practiced motion he'd used to carry wounded men across open ground decades earlier, and moved swiftly back toward the stairwell. Vanessa, who had refused to leave the hallway entirely, watched him emerge from the smoke carrying an unconscious woman as though the effort cost him nothing, his breathing controlled. His pace steady despite the added weight. "Move," he said simply, passing her without stopping, carrying Priya directly toward the stairwell exit and down 4 flights to the lobby, where paramedics arriving on scene immediately took over her care. Firefighters arrived moments later, quickly containing the electrical fire before it could spread further, and within 20 minutes the building had been declared safe for employees to return. Though most chose to spend the rest of the afternoon gathered in the lobby, shaken and grateful, the situation hadn't turned into something far worse. Vanessa found Frank near the loading dock afterward, quietly wiping soot from his hands with a rag, his uniform smudged with ash that same scratched. Faded watch still on his wrist beneath his rolled sleeve. "You went back in," she said, still catching her breath. "Everyone else was evacuating and you went back in. Someone was still inside," Frank said simply, as though the explanation required nothing further. "How did you know what to do?" "That wasn't panic, that wasn't luck. You moved like you'd done that exact thing before." Frank was quiet for a long moment, glancing down at the watch on his wrist before answering, "Because I have." A long time ago, in a much worse version of that hallway, Vanessa's expression shifted slowly from confusion to something closer to understanding. "The watch," she said, "I made a joke about it. In front of half the office." "I remember," Frank said without bitterness. "Where did you get it?" Frank exhaled slowly. 22 years ago, I served as a combat medic overseas. During an ambush, 3 men in my unit went down in open ground, exposed to enemy fire. I went out and got them, one at a time, 400 yards each way. Took a round through my shoulder on the last trip, but I got all 3 of them back." He glanced at the watch again. "My commanding officer gave me this the next day. Told me it had belonged to his father, another soldier, another war. Said a man who does something like that deserves to carry something that actually means something." Vanessa stood in silence, the earlier joke replaying uncomfortably in her mind, feeling suddenly very small against the weight of what he'd just described. "I judged that watch the moment I saw it," she said quietly. "I never once considered it might be the most important thing you owned." "Most people don't," Frank said, not unkindly. "It doesn't look like much, it's not supposed to. What it represents was never about how it looks." Over the following weeks, word of what had happened in the server room spread quietly through the office, employees who'd witnessed Frank's calm, decisive action during the fire recounting it, in tones far different from the ones they'd used to dismiss him weeks earlier. Priya Chandra, recovering fully within days, personally thanked him in front of the entire 4th floor, describing in detail how she owed her life to a man most of them had barely noticed before that afternoon. Vanessa called Frank into her office the following Monday, the same watch still visible on his wrist as he sat across from her desk. "I want to apologize," she said. "Publicly, if you're comfortable with that. What I said about your watch was thoughtless and it was wrong." Frank considered the offer for a moment. "I don't need an apology in front of anyone," he said. "I appreciate it privately, that's enough." "I also want to offer you a different position," Vanessa continued. "Head of Building Safety and Emergency Response, full authority to implement whatever protocols you think we actually need, given what almost happened." Frank studied her for a long moment. "I took this job because it was quiet," he said. "I'm not looking to be recognized for what happened years ago or for what happened last week." "I understand that," Vanessa said. "But quiet doesn't mean invisible. What you did in that server room deserves more than a name badge that says janitor." Frank finally allowed himself the smallest smile. "Then let it be quiet recognition, no press, no announcement. Just let me do the job properly, the same way I did the last one." Vanessa nodded, something in her understanding shifting permanently in that moment. "Agreed." Months later, Kroll Marketing's building had one of the most thorough emergency response protocols of any office tower downtown. Quietly overseen by a man most new employees still assumed was simply part of the maintenance staff. Vanessa never mentioned the fire publicly, never used it as a marketing story or a leadership anecdote at industry conferences. though she thought about it often. Particularly whenever she caught herself judging someone too quickly based on how little they seemed to carry. She noticed Frank's watch again one afternoon, months later, as he adjusted a smoke detector near the elevator bank, and this time she didn't see something faded or worn. She saw 22 years of a promise kept quietly, without applause, exactly the way its wearer preferred it. Walking back toward her office, Vanessa understood something that no leadership seminar had ever fully taught her, that the things people carry quietly are often the heaviest. And the ones least interested in being noticed are frequently the ones who have already proven, in moments most people never witness, exactly what they're capable of. Real worth, she realized, was never about how something looked on the surface. It was about what it had cost to earn, and the 60-year-old janitor with the scratched, faded watch had already taught her more about that than any account she'd ever managed.